Hello class, this video is about trigonometry. Trigonometry means triangle measure. And we're doing trigonometry whenever we talk about sine, cosine, and tangent ratios. Sine, cosine, and tangent are the ratios of the sides of a right triangle. So if you have a right triangle, okay, and you compare the lengths of the sides and make a fraction of them, that, surprisingly enough, that ratio is always the same, no matter if it's a small triangle or a large one. If you have a baby triangle and you have the angle here x, and you compare the ratio of sides A over B, you get the same answer as if you were to have a larger triangle and the same angle x with different numbers A and B. You get the same ratio every time. And that ratio has a special name. That's the cosine ratio. Alright, and so those ratios have special names. In order to find the sine, cosine, and tangent, the first thing that you need to be able to do is identify the sides of a triangle by their names. The hypotenuse of a right triangle is the longest side, and that's the side that's opposite straight across from the 90-degree angle. So the angle down here I've named, instead of using an X, okay, I use this symbol theta to mean angle. Now, right opposite across from theta, this side of the triangle is called the opposite side. The only side left is the side at the bottom. This is the adjacent side. It's the side that touches the angle. What if the angle was up here? If the angle was here, then I would come down this way, and this side down here would now be my opposite. And it looks like the hypotenuse would still be in the same spot. The side that touches the angle is on this side. My adjacent side is now here. So, the opposite and the adjacent can change. It depends on where the angle is. Now, here comes the exciting part for today's lesson. When I have this triangle, just like I said, I can label the sides. Now, if I take those numbers and make a fraction, that's where I get my trigonometric ratios. The sine of the angle is the opposite divided by the hypotenuse. The cosine of the angle is the adjacent over the hypotenuse. And the tangent of the angle is opposite over adjacent. This is really important, so you have to memorize it. We have this great acronym to help you remember it, and that acronym is SOHCAHTOA. If I take the first letter from the sine, the first letter from the opposite and the adjacent, I can see that the sine is O over H. And again, using the first letters, H, C is A over H. And the first letters from tangent, tangent is O over A. This is SOHCAHTOA. SOHCAHTOA helps me remember the relationships. So if you can spell SOHCAHTOA, then you can remember what all of these are. Let's look at this and let's do an example. Alright, I've now put some numbers into this triangle so that we can find the relationship. Now, looking at that triangle, what is the sine of the angle? Well, I know that the sine of the angle is the opposite over the hypotenuse. So, it looks like my opposite side is 3 and the hypotenuse is 5. So, that means that the sine is 3 over 5. The cosine of the angle is the adjacent over the hypotenuse. The adjacent side is 4 and the hypotenuse is 5. The cosine is 4 over 5. The tangent is the opposite over the adjacent. My opposite side is 3 and the adjacent is 4. So my tangent is 3 over 4. Alright, here are 3 examples. For the first one, what I want you to do first to solve these problems is to label the sides O, A, and H. Which one is the hypotenuse? Well, here's my 90-degree angle. The hypotenuse is right opposite from the 90-degree angle. It's the longest side. The opposite side is the side that's opposite from the angle. come straight down from the angle that they give you. It looks like x is my opposite. Now I find the adjacent is the side that touches the angle, and we have the 12 is going to be our adjacent. The next step after you label the sides of a triangle is to figure out which one we should use, sine, cosine, or tangent. In order to do this, we're going to think SOHCAHTOA. Alright, so I wrote SOHCAHTOA at the top of my paper. If I have the O and the H, that will mean I use sine. If I have the A and the H, I'll use cosine, and if I have the O and the A, I'll use tangent. Which do I have in my picture? Well, there are no numbers by the H, so I'm not going to use that. However, I know that my O is X, and I know that my 12 is A. Those are the two I can use, O and A. O and A tells me that I need to use tangent. The angle on the inside is 43. The tangent equals the opposite side over the adjacent side. So I'm going to have x over 12. Great! That is a very important step, and when you're doing your work, I want you to make sure that you've written this part down. Now, from here we can just solve for x. What do we have to do to get the x by itself? Well, it looks like the only thing that's next to the x on this side of the equal sign is the 12. Since we have divided by 12, multiply by 12. So, these 12s will cancel. My answer is going to be 12 times the tangent of 43. Now I can get my calculator and put this in to get the answer. In the next example, go ahead and label the triangle. First step, label OA and H. The x is going to be my hypotenuse. Now, the side that's directly opposite from the angle that they give you is the opposite side. And then the side that touches the angle here on the bottom, that's the adjacent. The next step is to see which one I should use, sine, cosine, or tangent. So, it looks like in this problem that I have an A. I know that A is 7, and I know that my hypotenuse is x. But there are no numbers next to the O, so I'm not going to use that. If I have A and H tells me A and H is right next to the C. C for cosine. I need to do cosine. Always remember to put the angle. Alright, the cosine of the angle is A over H. So I'm going to have 7 over x. This time it looks like the x is in the denominator. It's in the bottom of the fraction. Before I can really get x by itself, I need to get it out of there. So let's start by multiplying both sides by x. And now I have x cosine 21 equals 7. In order to get the x by itself, I can divide. Divide by cosine 21. This gives me my answer right here. 7 divided by cosine 21. Now, I can take out my calculator and put that in to get the answer. On this example, first step, label the sides O, A, and H. So, this time it looks like I have the O and I have the H, but there are no numbers next to the A, so I'm not going to use that. Which one, sine, cosine, or tangent, uses the O and the H, but does not use A? That would be sine. It's always sine of the angle, but this time I don't know the angle, I'll just put x. And the sine equals the opposite over the hypotenuse, 5 over 14. The thing that's next to the x that I need to get to cancel is the sine. Here's what makes sine cancel out so that you can just get the x by itself. It's the inverse sine. The inverse sine has a little -1 next to it and is a special button on your calculator that we'll talk about tomorrow. You're going to do the inverse sine of both sides. Here, the inverse sine and the sine cancel to give you x. Here we have the inverse sine of 5 over 14. Now we can put this in our calculator to get the answer. Alright guys, more of this in class tomorrow.